Okay, guys, it's white to move, and this position is for you to evaluate it and try to come up with the best next move. Of course, this lesson is about positional chess, more specifically about the light squares strategy. If you know that you have control over the light squares, how do we convert this kind of advantages? So if you pause the video and came up with an answer, let me know in the comments. And with that said, let's take a look at the game from the very beginning. Now, this is an English opening. We've had many lessons on it. And I got to this game because one of my students and we were looking at games from 7th world champion Smyslov, but we were looking at the games that he has lost and trying to learn from his mistakes. Now, in this game, notice how we're playing, it's like an English opening, but if you look closer, it looks a lot like the closed Sicilian with colors reversed. So it's like if you had played e4, c5, then knight c3, and we get into these variations. And of course, I told you back in those lessons with the English that this is like playing the Sicilian one move ahead in many cases. So anyhow, at this point, you can see already how we have full control over the light square d5. We're also controlling e4 and so on. So e3, d6, knight g2, e2, knight e7, rook b1, thematic plan on the English, also the closed Sicilian, a5, preventing us from doing b4. Now d3, notice how we continue to control light squares in the center, bishop e6, and now of course it is time to place our knight in the center. So knight d5, very attractive square. If of course they take us with the knight, then c takes d5, that's going to be a fork. Bishop is defending, and if they take with the bishop, not only do they give us the pair of bishops, but also after we take back, we get semi-open file, a fixed pawn on c7, so very attractive for the white pieces if we get to that position. Now, after knight d5, of course, queen d7, we're familiar with this idea, and you will see here that the white pieces do not castle right away because we still don't know if the black pieces want to play h5, h4, so instead, we continue to prepare on the queen side. We've talked about this with other openings, more specifically when we talked about the peers against the 150 attack. Well, if my opponent is trying to remove my fianchetto bishop, attack me on the king side, maybe I delay castling to see what happens. Now, at this point, Smyslov just castled, and then Boris Gulko, guys, very strong player, castled as well. And after king h8, we got bishop d2, finishing development. I don't want to start putting pressure. I don't want to start attacking if my pieces are not ready to back it up. So after bishop d2, pawn to f5. Now the black pieces play on the king side. White pieces play on the queen side. Now, guys, from this moment on, pay even more close attention to the light squares. Of course, the white pieces should be focusing on the queen side, but before we get to it, we have pawn f4, just stopping that initiative that the black pieces are getting on the king side. And then after bishop g8, guys, we gotta ask ourselves, what is my opponent trying to do with this move? Well, clearly they're trying to take on d5, and they didn't want us to fork the bishop and the knight. So that's okay. Now, if we're able to come to that conclusion, then we gotta think ourselves, what kind of move can we do to just make it more uncomfortable for them to take on d5? Well, the move that the white pieces played also adds up to our expansion on the queen side, and we continue to work on the light square. So queen a4 was played, pinning that knight. Now if they take on d5 like they did, we have pawn takes, knight has to go to b8, and now at this point, I really want to know what you guys would do. There are not many options, so it should make it easier, but try to understand or try to think of the reasons behind whatever decision you make. Well, many of you, I'm sure, you're thinking, well, I'm going to take on d7, then bring the rook over to the c file, things like that. But in reality, guys, what we should be doing is looking at our candidate moves, calculate a little bit into each one of them, and then compare the two resulting positions. For example, if I look at queen d7, knight d7, rook c1, they could definitely defend that pawn. And notice how the knight is in a good position now. If instead I just move my queen away, this knight is not going to have it so easy to develop. So passive piece, and the rooks are not connected. So which of these two is going to allow me to maintain and even convert my advantage? So of course, we have here queen c2, getting away from that trade and putting pressure on the c7 pawn. Now the black pieces are saying, no big deal, I'm going to play c6, knight c3, then rook f to c8. And at this point, this is the question to you guys. Would you take on c6 or not? And according to Gulko, this was the most critical moment for him. After this point in the game, he said that everything became clear. He knew exactly what he needed to do from this moment on. Well, he decided to just take on c6. And the point is that, yes, we help him develop that knight. We talked so much about it. But now, guys, without that pawn on c6, there is a weak square on d5. There's a weak square on b5. And of course, the white pieces have control over it. Now, a4 also we could say is ours. We could occupy it with our pieces. And by the way, those of you who have been with me from the beginning, on lesson 51, we talked about the check peers. And I told you about the importance of that c6 pawn many times, where if they challenge the pawn, we wait for them to take us. We take it back with the b pawn to continue to control the important d and b squares. So after knight takes c6, now we got queen a4. You see the queen goes to that square. We control b5, we pin the knight on the queen, and after rook a to b8, then this is the position that I showed you guys before. Black pieces are saying, okay, you win, we're going to play on the queen side, but I'm ready to play b5. What are you going to do? Now, if you couldn't find the move before, if you didn't spend enough time, this is another opportunity for you to do it. The move, guys, is actually a move that claims full control over those squares. If we lose control over those squares, then there's no advantage for the white pieces. So the move is, of course, queen b5. So the queen stops the pawn from getting to b5, continues to add pressure to d5, and you're going to see how from this moment on, the game becomes very easy to convert. So after queen b5, we got bishop e6, then knight goes to d5, same light square. Queen goes to f7. Now I don't have to worry about it. This square is more than defended. It belongs to me. So I'm going to instead improve the only piece that is not doing much. And that's going to be this other rook. Notice that this rook is on a very nice file, exactly what the black queen is. My bishop is on a very good diagonal. This one is pretty well developed compared to the rook. The knight, we don't have to talk about it. The queen. So this rook goes to c1. Now we got rook e8, and then this is the final maneuver that to me it was very instructive. So I'm gonna give you a chance to think of what you do as the white pieces. And the idea here is the following. This knight seems very powerful on d5, but it's not really doing a lot for the other pieces. It's not making it easy for the other pieces to cooperate and help us. So instead, Golko talks about how many times we fall in love with these beautiful looking pieces. They're in a good position, and sometimes it's okay to just trade them or move them to a square that makes more sense. So he said, you know what? I'm going to transfer my knight from this light square to this light square. So he went knight b6. Then pawn takes. At this point, we got to make a decision. It looks a little bit overwhelming, but at this point in the course, we should know it's very important that we keep our pieces active. Again, rook on the same file as the queen. We could transfer over to the h file, and if they ever attack us, we simply go back to safety. So after g5, we go back to f1, queen g6. Then finally the knight goes to c6, and we're putting pressure on d6, on a5, so you can tell this knight now is way better than when it was on d5. Of course, black pieces need to chop it off, but this is the final concession where the white pieces control the light squares. Without their light square bishop, this bishop is going to be a monster. All of our pieces are going to have it easier. And to make things even worse for Smyslov, he played now f4. He understands he needs to create something on the king side, but now notice how this light square diagonal becomes available for the bishop. So bishop e4. And by the way, guys, notice how the black pieces seem a little bit exposed on the king side. And that was another idea behind rook f4. We're like sort of inviting them or provoking this g5. And that sort of opens up that king for our pieces, for our bishops to attack. When we talked about the king's Indian defense, we talked about these pawn storms that the black pieces are doing, but we talked about the center being locked. Here, it's not the case. So they take rook c4, f4, bishop e4, of course, and after queen h5, we take, then queen e2, just ignoring the pawn, trying to create something on the queen side. But again, guys, we do not need to get ahead of ourselves. We've been talking about this lately a lot. So keep it cool, look at your candidate moves, don't give your opponent any unnecessary counterplay. So instead, rook f2, keeping it simple, queen d1, king g2, they take, and after bishop f4, this is just too much. Look at these bishops, look at the rook ready to come over, look at the queen, and we have everything under control around the king. So after knight d4, hitting my queen, queen is going to go to the king side now. My pieces are aiming at that king, and I have 1, 2, 3 attackers. They don't have as many defenders. So after queen g5, we got knight e2, and now this rook, notice how we improved it from b1 to c1, then to c4, but now we're going to go rook c7. Yes, they're trying to create something over here, but everything is under control. They don't have a light square bishop, and we're threatening checkmate in one move. So after rook g8, see if you can find the final move that made Smyslov resign. Well, of course, it has to do with the light squares. So we're going to create a battery, and there's nothing they could do, guys. We're threatening checkmate, and even if they put us in check, we just move out the way, and there's just nothing they could do. So with that said, I hope that you found this useful. Notice how we're going from recent lessons where we talked about attacking the king, but in a more aggressive fashion. Here is more with a strategic positional approach, but eventually we convert that into an attack on the king.